So different tack, same kind of subject, but this afternoon, this session, a bit shorter than the one before, thinking about getting the data. So again, I'll make the slides available online. There's quite a lot of tips and tricks here. You'll be able to sort of use this as a reference afterwards. So just to recap from earlier, it's really easy if we just dive into tracking data to start drowning under too much. We need to focus on what matters. And so we've been through earlier how to focus on tracking the right things in order to answer the questions that are important to us, right? So how are we doing? What are the results of our experiments, in particular? So how do we go about doing that? How do we go about getting the data so that we're able to answer these questions? And this is the key point. Start with the questions that you want to answer, and only then think about what tools should I use, what platforms should I use, what data should I be collecting in order to answer those questions. So my first point, just to put it out there, is like everybody starts with Google Analytics and actually don't use Google Analytics, right? So, okay, maybe it's kind of useful. It's really good at top of funnel, actually, figuring out like where your visitors are coming from, which channels. But the thing is, for most of the types of questions that we want to answer, it's just the wrong type of tool. Google Analytics was designed for publishers. It's designed around sessions and page views. Instead, for most of our metrics, we want to focus on unique people, unique humans, and the key actions that they took. The specific user journeys that Google Analytics focuses on, it's like came to this page, like clicked through to the next page, went back to their home page, like bounce rate, session flow. They're typically not that important. It's really useful if we're designing specific pages and we want to know where did people click next. But if you think to like all the metrics we've been talking about today, overall success, conversion rates, what matters is how many people got there eventually. It doesn't matter the path they took to get there, right? So pretty much every metric we should think, 90% chance the metric should be phrased in terms of what percentage of unique users reached this step eventually. Maybe it's like reach the step within the time period. So what percentage of users who signed up this week, made a purchase within 7 days, something like that. So instead, what do we use? Instead, we want to use analytics tools that are focused around tracking events or actions and individual user behavior in the way that Google Analytics just focuses on aggregates. So examples, Mixpanel, 500 part of Localytics, Amplitude. So if you've used these, you'll have a feel already for how they have a different approach. If you haven't, this is the key difference. And typically, it's these sorts of tools that lend themselves to answering the sorts of questions that we've identified earlier today. So some basic concepts about the difference in things we can track. We can track events, we can track properties of those events, and then we can track people. So events, simple, something just happened. That could be someone hit a landing page. It could be someone clicked the sign up button. It could be someone completed, added something to cart. It could be someone completed a trial period or upgraded, right? The properties are about what just happened. So each event has some properties that we can decide. We can decide what properties we want on our event. So the upgrade button, what plan were they upgrading for? Or what period, like monthly or annual? Adding to cart, what products were they adding to cart? When they viewed a product, what category did they come from? What product were they viewing? How much is that product? So we can figure out whether people are viewing our expensive products or our cheaper products. And then finally, the people. So these platforms use this, the notion of people to connect events to particular users so that we can track the series of events and then the funnel that users go through. And people can also have properties such as where they came from, how long they've been around, whether they've purchased from us before. So what do we want to track? A lot of people start by going out and you look at your website and you start tracking a few events, sort of feeling your way. And this can sort of be a good place to get started, but very quickly you end up with a series of data that's maybe not the most useful data you need, or things start to get a little messy when you realize you need to add other things later. So it's good to ask this question up front. What do I need to track? What events are relevant to me and to our application or site? So in short, all the key user behaviors. And I've sort of made a list of things to think about. So like pages or screens viewed actually is a good place to start thinking. Like viewed a product page, viewed a category page, like viewed a blog page or viewed one of our content marketing pages. Key actions that are taken. I already mentioned some examples like add to cart. One way to look at it is anything that writes a new row or updates an existing row in our database, like posted a piece of content, or in our session store, so like added something to cart if we're storing that in the user's session, then it's probably significant. Do you have all the key steps in your user funnel? Right, so we've already been thinking about what is the journey that the user goes through. They come to our site for the first time, they explore some content so they don't bounce. Maybe they sign up for a trial or some content marketing, gated content, whatever it may be. And then the other thing is anything that has external impact. So for example, if we have a share feature or something like that, we probably want to track that as well. So one thing to think about, so I was thinking about examples of counterintuitive stuff that we maybe don't think of up front. I was thinking of an example of a company I worked with recently where it's like a mobile app and it's got a feed. So imagine Facebook or Twitter, you're scrolling through the feed. And so if you're thinking about the key events to track, something that would be easy to miss at the beginning would be like whether someone saw a piece of content in the feed. Because you need to know that in order to measure the click-through rate for different pieces of content. So one of our key questions might be how effective is our content and is that getting better over time? And what about on an individual level? So in order to know how effective that is, we might think if people see it, do they click through? And if we don't know whether people scrolled down the feed and saw that piece of content, then we won't be able to track that. So thinking that as one example, what other stuff for your products, for your businesses is relevant, where it's like, what question am I going to want to ask later? And what will I need to know to answer that? So a few tips to run through, sort of relatively quick fire. As I said, the slides are shared. So the first one is easy to read and meaningful event names. And it's very easy to start throwing in events sort of, as you go and end up having something that's kind of difficult to navigate when you're browsing your analytics system. So keep them short, stick to a convention, omit superfluous words. So like compare these two examples, like user viewed homepage. Well, if it wasn't the user that viewed a homepage, who else would it be, right? So we can probably omit the word user. Keep it sort of nice to read. There's no need to make it sort of technical with this snake case underscores. Beyond that, so here's a great example of like inconsistent formatting. So if you go into your Mixpanel dashboard, for example, and we've got a bunch of events here, like viewed some campaign page, viewed whatever, install extension, I'm not quite sure what that means, complete the product wizard. If we set these up, we'd probably know what they were because we just set them up. But over time, or if we're sharing this with other people on the team, it's going to be a bit hard to follow. So compare that with this example, right? So here we've got account logged in, account created, account logged out, Facebook connected, transaction created, transaction confirmed, account updated, email entered, email verified. So the key suggestion here is this form of the event name of like object and then the action. So then all events related to the same objects are sort of shown together when viewed alphabetically. So like product viewed, product added to cart, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next thing to do is to get really disciplined about this, is to actually keep a basic spreadsheet to track all the events that you're creating. And you can plan this out in advance. I'm not sure this is too readable. So the columns here are like the name of the event, like why you're creating it, the properties of the event, the possible property values for that property, where you want to track it, so like on the sign-up page or when the daily job is sent, and then finally the code. So this is actually a template that 500 has created, this template spreadsheet with a bunch of good stuff in that I'll make sure that we've got the link shared for you all. So you can start here and just start planning out what events you need. And then over time, you have this really handy reference to like if you can't remember or if you're trying to like upskill someone new. So the next tip is to make sure you're tracking your individual users. And so all the analytics platforms like Mixpanel, Segment, Amplitude, etc., they support this functionality of having a distinct ID for each user. The key, so a tip here is don't use the email address. It typically doesn't matter in the beginning, but over time, people could change their email address. And so you get this sort of like little bit of confusion around, I've got this individual user, if I track it by email address. So typically, it's best just to use an auto-generated user ID from your own database. And then use the feature from the analytics platform, typically called aliasing, so that the point here is you want to make sure you've joined up the things people did when they were anonymous, so before they created an account, when they first came to your site, with whatever they did after they signed up. You want to make that connection in your analytics system so that you can join the dots between the behaviors before sign up and after sign up. Why? So this allows you to do things like my users that signed up and got really active, what channels did they come from? What activities did they go through? So you can really understand the full funnel. It's very easy to sort of not have this working correctly. It's one of the most common areas for bugs when you're getting technical and implementing the tracking. So be very wary of it. Key point, can we track the whole journey from a user from when they first arrived anonymously to when we knew them as a logged-in user? So the next tip, so now we're getting onto the marketing side of things, is to annotate your users with source data. Okay, what do I mean by that? Basically, against each user, we need to have a record somewhere within our analytics system of where they came from. So this could be the referrer on the web, like if they came from another domain, the UTM tags, UTM source, campaign, etc. If we're on mobile native apps using install tracking, apps like Apps Flyer, branch metrics, where we can actually track where those installs came from. So what I recommend here is actually track a sign-up event and add as properties on the user and on the sign-up event where that user came from. So a property for the referrer, for the UTM tags. And so then later on, when we want to segment our users and sort of dive in, we have that information. And potentially, depending on how your analytics system is set up, you might want to maintain that if it's not done automatically so that you actually keep this data around for all key events in the future. So say if you've got a purchase event or a sign-up event to paid, you can easily segment that by where those people who were upgrading or purchasing came from. Because that's super important when we want to think about doubling down on what works. Okay, question?
So this might be a technical question, but we get a lot of inbounds to our website, which then bounce to the App Store, the Apple App Store. It doesn't track across between our site and the App Store. Do you know of any way to actually tag into the App Store?
Yeah, so this is what companies like Apps Flyer do. So there's a bunch of them. Install tracking and attribution on mobile for specifically that problem. So there's a selection to choose from. Yeah, take a look into those guys and the competitors. So this next one, so this Mixpanel specific, is like the difference between people and events. This is just something to be aware of if you're using Mixpanel, that they won't let you query for users who did particular events. So you can only query by properties of your users. So just as a heads up. So for example, you might want to say, show me all the users who added this product to cart, right? Or show me all the users who upgraded to this plan at some point. So the thing, our options are either do this using our own database or make sure that every time some major event happens, we actually add a property to the user recording the fact that that took place. And so we can have first added to cart on such and such a date, and then later on you can come back and say, show me all the users that first added to cart within the last week. Something to be aware of. Another quick tip, so a lot of these platforms have e-commerce or revenue tracking capabilities built in. So if you have commerce functionality, just make use of them. It's it gives you extra functionality in dashboards. Basically, you just add in purchase events and annotate them with the revenue data, and then they'll spit out automatic reports that help you track your average revenue per user and all the good stuff like that. So it's there, make use of it. And then finally, one thing that it's very easy not to do, but use a development project for testing. So basically, don't send all the data from your test apps and your test website to the same place as your live data. In the beginning, you don't have any real data, so it doesn't matter. But over time, like speaking from experience, this sort of stuff, when you're implementing it, it's very easy to screw it up. You'll probably fix it 2 or 3 times. And then you'll just kick yourself that when you're trying to weed through your real data and figure out what's real and what's not. So just really simple, be disciplined up front, create a different account, different login, different project, whatever it is. I'm going to skip that. So we've done like a bit of a deep dive of some tips on like how to use these tools. So thinking about tracking the funnel. So this is like connecting it all together. So if you've got your funnel planned out and you've started with the pirate metrics, and we think about the key events that you want to track at different stages in the funnel. So top of funnel, you've got acquisition, so that's sign-ups or installs. Middle of the funnel, it's like what happens after install, right? So you have engagement metrics, retention metrics, people interacting with particular features. And then bottom of the funnel, it's like when people are ready to pay, so purchase or monetization. So this is a good framework for just thinking, like, have we ticked all the boxes and are we collecting all the relevant actions? Now, when we look at each stage of the funnel in aggregates and we look at like the conversion, that's good. It's a good start. So we can say like what percentage of people are proceeding from like this event to this event. So like the steps in the funnel. But looking at the funnel overall will only get us so far. The truth is much more nuanced. So just to dive into some ideas around how it may be useful to segment our data. And then this is in the context of what we need to track to be able to do this. So some thoughts, like users that have come via different channels are going to have different behaviors. If you haven't thought about this yet, like it may be very easy to get users via Facebook, but they may be less engaged than users that came via word of mouth. So you have different properties of your channels. Different cohorts will have had different experiences of your product. So as over time you're improving your product, you know, people may be more likely to activate if they have a better experience. I think we mentioned earlier, different users may be exposed to different buckets of an A/B test. So the key thing with all these examples is that they're all properties of your users. So this came up earlier. I said we'd be coming back to it. This is where you've got your UTM tags, where the user came from. You've got your landing page, right? Which page did they land on? That's actually super valuable. The landing page can be a really good indicator of where the traffic came from, even if your tagging is not great. If you know where they landed. Did they land on the home page? Did they land on like a detail page? When did they sign up? The A/B test buckets, and so on and so forth. Were they like a viral refer, or did they come directly? These are all properties. So what we want to do is we want to store all these properties, so annotate our users in our database or in our analytics system, right? So that we can segment based on them later. Cool. Any questions so far? Great. Yep.
Sorry, I want to go back to the tips when you were talking about like tracking events. What do you mean exactly when you're saying use aliasing to connect events?
Right. So basically, the short answer is to connect up events tracked pre-post sign up. So you want to make sure that you can connect the dots between someone who's anonymous, who's come to your site but hasn't signed up and created an account yet, with someone who's actually created an account and logged in. Or you want to connect the dots between someone who hasn't purchased yet and someone who's purchased and identified themselves by giving you their email address, right? So the reason I mention it, the functionality is called aliasing. Basically, just go and when you're implementing your tracking, look at the relevant section. And as a warning, it's the common area that people screw up and need to like keep fixing a couple of times before they get it right. And if you don't have it, basically you've got this big disconnect between you don't know where all your users actually came from and what they did before they signed up. And so you're flying half blind. So it's just an important point to make sure you can connect those dots. Cool. Right, so getting through this. So just some quick tips from a technical perspective. Number one, I really recommend using a tag manager to install your analytics. And this is me speaking as a developer myself, so I'm more than happy with inserting all the code, all the tracking manually, and I've done that a lot myself in the past. The reason is I've just experienced its incredible benefits from flexibility. Just things like having your own separate version control system for your tracking, being able to roll out new tracking and without having to do complete deploys. Allowing, like, there's a point-and-click interface where sort of less technical people can still edit your tracking and add new events and stuff like that. So it's incredibly valuable, even as a technical person. Don't be afraid of using the tool designed to save us from the technology. The next one is, check out Segment, a great tool if you haven't heard of it. So what the folks at Segment have done is build basically this pipe where you send all your data to them, implement their API once, and then you can just use their dashboard to switch in and out different analytics tracking tools and different marketing tools. So you can switch in Mixpanel, you can switch in like MailChimp to get all your data into your email campaigns. You can switch in various different like, what do you call them, like email lifecycle marketing tools. And it's great because if you just implement this once, then you're able to switch in a bunch of stuff. Honestly, I found it less useful for native mobile, but a lot more useful on the web. So worth a heads up for that. Hey.
Sorry, so at the moment we're using Kissmetrics.
Yep.
If we're not using Segment, are we still able to change to like Mixpanel? Or is that?
You are, and so it's a one-off job to like change over to another tool like Mixpanel or Amplitude or whatever. But the point is, if you're going to do that once, you know, the folks at Segment have identified that if you just do it to them, and then it's like one button click to switch on Mixpanel and have them both in parallel so you can test which one works for you. What are the downsides? I mean, take a look. Like, it's a paid-for service. You know, check out the free tiers. Bear in mind like how much traffic you have and how much cache you have. See whether it makes sense, but it's almost certainly worth a look.
I've used Segment before too, so if anybody has any questions about it, I'd be happy to.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Who's this guy? Stand up and give your away.
Chris Herr, I'm CTO for live sharing. So.
Chris has yet to learn that what will happen when he volunteers in this group of eager people. Thank you, Chris.
I geek out on this stuff. So.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. How? Okay, something I wanted to mention. So I've implemented tracking for a bunch of different companies. Ended up doing the same things over again. So everything I just spoke about, free code. I've built an open source JavaScript library that if you're looking to implement tracking on the website for the first time, free code. Take a look. It helps you collect a bunch of stuff. So everything I was talking about, making sure you're tracking your attribution, your landing pages, adding properties to your users about when key events take place. It actually sits on top of Segment, so it's like yet another layer. I wonder how many layers we're going to add. Even if you don't use it, it might be interesting to look at. I've actually done my best to write some documentation, so it might be useful to look at the things I've gone through there. So this is there as a resource, throwing it out. Take a look. And then another thing while we're on talking about implementing stuff into our sites is a quick tip now. Add your Facebook and Google custom audience or remarketing pixels now. Because in the future, when you're thinking about making use of these tools, if you only implement the pixel later, you're starting from zero and you have to wait to collect your audience. Add that pixel now, and then you can start building up that audience ready to use it in the future. So while we're on the subject of tag managers and tracking, if you think you might be using these in the future, just drop that pixel in now, and then you'll win later. Question? What tools do you suggest for doing the pixel? So if you use Google Tag Manager, then you can just drop in the code. The pixel is basically like a line of JavaScript code. So if you do one integration to put Google Tag Manager into your site's code on every page, then you can then use that web interface to just drop in everything else. Cool. Any other questions so far? So I've got one more section to share with you today, and this is revisiting cohort analysis. Everyone remember cohort analysis? Who can give me a super clear definition? Scratching your head?
Group people together based on some metric and see how they compare.
Group people together based on some metric and see how they compare over time.
With each other.
With each other. Fantastic. Yeah. So if we average over our whole user base like this, We won't see half the detail. We want to split out by different cohorts or groups to really understand if there's any changes going on. So this is useful. So my final piece of content for this afternoon is about my own personal experience with my startup group spaces, and the sort of successes and challenges I had with cohort analysis, and sort of how I found an approach that was very successful for me. And this is related to the observation that a lot of the data we need is actually in our own database. So everything I've just talked about is about adding tracking, adding things on top. Maybe we already have some of that data. So the cohort analysis is great, but I found personally it was like really time-consuming to put together. And if you've tried it, you may empathize. There's also delays to get the latest data, because like we have to wait for the cohort to come to an end before we can do that calculation. And it's inflexible, because we don't just roll out new features on the 1st of every month or the 1st of every week. We want to roll stuff out all the time and then measure the difference. So I was scratching my head about this for years, actually, and found it really frustrating. But eventually, I came up with this approach that worked really well for me. So I'm just going to run through it quickly in case it's useful for you. So I kind of think about rolling cohorts. So that might give you some clue as to where we're going. The comparison is, so this traditional cohorts, fixed windows, the bar chart type view, fixed cohorts, monthly or weekly. Compare against this. So here, what I've got is I've got two metrics, so in a similar style. So these are like activation metrics. So the blue was, this is actually for Group Spaces, my previous company. So the blue is an activation. So it's like how many people within 7 days of sign up took any major actions, right? So they signed up and then did they do anything? And you can see over time, we started at like, 30% and we improved it over time and got up to about 75%. Winner, fantastic. And this is a daily thing, right? So you remember how we did the 28 averages before to smooth out the pattern. However, compare with the red line, which is within the same 7-day window, how many people came back after 24 hours and took any major action? So the difference, basically the gap between the two, all this lift for the blue is people that are doing all the actions in the first 24 hours, right? But they're not coming back and doing them between like day 1 and day 7. So what this is telling me is that over time, we managed to improve the activation, like the engagement in the first session after sign up. We had great success, but the sad thing is it never translated into meaningful growth, right? So real lesson there to share with you all to keep an eye on this. And so the format of the chart I've got here is like similar to that like 28-day rolling. It's like basically every point on this chart is a mini cohort that is based on the group of people in the window up to that particular day. So this allows me to monitor it on like a daily basis. So how do I go about this? Start with the observation that a lot of the data we want is in our existing database. So like we have a database table with our users, like user ID 1, Andy, signed up in 2013. And what I'd encourage you to do is, even if you're not, don't consider yourself super technical, to like learn the SQL query language so that you can query your database. It's really not that hard. And if you're not technical yourself, at least just pair with someone on your team or someone who can help you out to answer questions. All you need is like what we call a slave database copy for your analytics, often referred to as like a read replica. So it's a live copy of your database so that you can do whatever you want to it without worrying about screwing it up, right? You don't want to take down the website because the founder was trying to answer some question. So here we got our database with our users, and as an example, vanity metric, select count star from users. This will say, how many users have we signed up in all time, right? Select count of everything, that's what star means, count of everything from users. So how many users do I have? So that's good, but it's like a vanity metric, right? So let's make it more useful. So let's do a cohort. So let's say, how many users signed up in July? So let's, same as before, select count from users where the created date was bigger than 1st of July, at midnight, and less than 1st of August. So what I've done there is I've created a simple cohort. How many signups did I get in July? So far, so good. Let's add some more. Let's get something meaningful. How many people bought something? So select count from users, and then in the white, it's who signed up in July. And we're joining in our sales table, so we're looking for all sales with the same user ID. And what we're saying is, I want to count how many sales we've got where the date of the sale is less than adding 1 month to the date the user was created. So let's just think about that for a second. What we're saying is, we take the date that the user was created, add 1 month, so we've got within 1 month of sign up. And we're saying, how many sales do we have where the sale was within 1 month of the user signing up? So this gives us a really actionable cohort metric, right? So we can say for the cohort of July, how many sales did we get? And this is the total number, sales from users that signed up that month. And then we could make it a percentage by dividing by the total number of users who signed up in that month. So that's the white that we had already. So this is great. And so the way I went about it was I spent like half a day as a technical person just to build a super simple system. To automate running the queries like every hour. So rather than having to be there at the prompt, like typing them in and hitting enter and getting the number, automate running these queries on like a cron job or a scheduled task, and just store them in a simple database with a table with columns for the metric name, the time that we calculated the metric, and the value. And then, when we've got the data in this format, for example, many different metrics and when they were calculated, it's super easy to just create a page to graph the results. So I did this all manually myself, and now actually, when you get this far, there's a bunch of tools you can actually plug in, like Chart.io or like business analytics tools that will help you do all sorts of amazing charting based on just having the raw data. And this was incredibly useful for me, which is why I'm sharing it with you. So the insight here is looking at the data that was in your own database and looking at how you can just use simple queries to get a lot of these metrics. So here we've got umpteen screenshots of how I use this for like every kind of metric. And the other part of it is using that rolling cohort. So every day it was like the cohort of the users in the 28 days up to that point in time. So used it for all sorts of metrics. And that's my final share. So hopefully there was a lot of useful takeaways for you there. Yeah, any questions?
We got a call from RJ Metrics. So I think they were using a lot of what you were using there, but they sit down with you and they create a panel so you can track lifetime value of customers. They help you set it up, and therefore you kind of just got the database. I think the only drawback, I think that was about sort of $1,000 to start with. Do you reckon there's an inflection point where it makes sense to use those sort of guys to automate this so that it...
Yeah, I've worked with a couple of companies that use RJ Metrics. So RJ Metrics, if you're not familiar, it's a business intelligence tool. They target themselves enterprise level. I'm not super familiar with their pricing, but I believe, it starts at reasonable money. There's a lesson to learn there, like how do you make money? Charge reasonable money. Is there an inflection point? I think what matters is how you're making use of the data and are you using it to answer the right questions? And then based on the ability of your team, your bandwidth, how you're going to best spend your time, balancing that against, like, do you have money and cash to throw at it, right? And just get a solution that works out of the box. I think using these tools, like when you get to super scale, can be really useful. When I worked at Stripe, we had like 6 full-time people working purely on data infrastructure to allow us to analyze this data, right? I think the most important thing is to use this approach, and so the key takeaways are, what can you get out of your own database? And then when you're coming to look at how, if you're start by just writing some SQL queries and make sure there's value there for you first, and then you can say, okay, great, now I want to automate this. Should I do what Andy did and like spend a day or 2 building something, or is there something off the shelf I can use? Can I plug, where is my database hosted? Can I plug it into RJ Metrics or, I forget the name of the big one, but anyway, so I don't think it wasn't like, it didn't change the business that I've worked with, like, it didn't change the world for them. But it could be an effective way to do this sort of stuff. Any other questions?
Google Analytics, they don't sometimes give you keywords, they just say not set
Yes.
for privacy reasons.
Mhm.
There's no other way around that.
It's worth looking at the, what is it called? The Google Webmaster tools, which for some crazy reason is a different thing that sits somewhere completely different, that has a report that will give you an aggregate, like all the search keywords, or at least many of them. I'm not a super expert on this, but it's definitely something worth looking at to see if there's more information hiding in there. Yeah, it is something that changed over time, that it used to be you could see all of this data, and now it's hard or impossible to do so. But check out Google Webmaster Tools and their keyword report.
Doesn't Piwik do it more?
Say again, sorry?
Doesn't Piwik?
I don't know. What's that you can share with people?
Piwik.
Piwik.
Piwik is an extra, it's better than Google Analytics.
There we go.
And it's
Piwik,
not more
check it
Google.
out. Cool. Any other questions?
That's free too.
It's free too. Awesome. This guy's a good friend with Piwik, folks.
Piwik. Piwik.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for your time. We have one more workshop this afternoon, in 20 minutes' time, where we are going to be focusing on some more hands-on stuff. So it's an opportunity for you to make use of the time whilst myself and the rest of other people on the distro team are going to be around. So specifically thinking about, okay, under this heading of tracking and collecting the data, a few things. You can plan out your events or do an audit of what events you're currently collecting. And so that's fill out this spreadsheet template that I've got here. There. This spreadsheet template with your event tracking plan. You can go back to your KPI dashboard. And actually, it's useful to start trying to plug in the real numbers. And by doing so, you'll start figuring out where the holes in your current data collection are, or whether your current tools, like if you're using Google Analytics, you may find you're unable to answer questions like what percentage of unique users did a particular action. And there was a third piece that I forget. Those two are good enough for now. See you in 20 minutes.